Sometimes a life feels finished on paper but incomplete in the heart, and Daniel Harper learned this truth on a quiet autumn evening in Seattle when the city lights reflected softly against rain-washed streets and every sound felt distant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel was 36, a man others described as stable and sensible, someone who paid bills on time, showed up when expected, and avoided chaos at all costs. He worked as an urban planner, shaping cities with logic and order, yet his own emotional world had been designed the same way, carefully, tightly, and without room for surprise. Years ago, after watching his parents' marriage collapse and later living through a painful breakup of his own, Daniel had created a rule for himself: never let desire lead, never let emotion decide what logic could handle better. He told himself this rule was wisdom, a shield that protected him from longing, heartbreak, and foolish hope. At first, the rule worked. It helped him choose safe relationships, predictable days, and quiet evenings that never demanded more than he could give. But over time, something subtle began to fade. The excitement he once felt about life softened into habit. His days blended together. Friends moved on, started families, chased dreams, while Daniel stayed still, convincing himself that contentment was the same as happiness. That autumn evening, as he stood alone by his window, something unsettling stirred inside him, a feeling he recognized but had ignored for years. It wasn't sadness exactly, but a deep, quiet ache, like a song stuck just out of reach. He tried to distract himself by cleaning his apartment, checking emails, and scrolling through news headlines, until a new message appeared on his screen with a name he had not seen in a very long time: Emily Carter. The sight of it made his chest tighten. Emily was not just someone from his past, she was a life he once almost lived. They had met years ago during graduate school in Boston, brought together by late-night study sessions and long walks through old streets where they talked about books, dreams, and the kind of people they hoped to become. Their connection had grown quietly, without drama, built on understanding rather than intensity, and that made it harder to forget. When Emily received a job offer in Vancouver, Daniel had stood at a crossroads. He had wanted to follow her, deeply and honestly, but fear spoke louder. He told himself love should not require sacrifice, that long-distance hope was impractical, and that letting her go was the adult decision. Emily left, and their communication slowly faded, not from anger, but from unresolved feelings neither of them knew how to name. Now, after years of silence, Emily's email was short and gentle. She was in Seattle temporarily for work and wondered if Daniel would like to meet for coffee. That single question unraveled something inside him. His mind immediately searched for reasons to say no. He was busy, it was complicated, it would open doors better left closed, but his heart responded faster, waking up with a sense of recognition that felt both comforting and dangerous. Daniel sat still for a long moment, listening to the rain, remembering the promise he had made to himself: stay safe, stay controlled, don't chase what might leave. Yet another voice, softer but persistent, asked a question he could not ignore: what if safety had cost him too much? He thought about the years that had passed in careful silence, the moments he had chosen distance over connection, and the conversations he had rehearsed but never spoken. Emily was not just asking for coffee, she was unknowingly testing the rule that had shaped his entire adult life. Daniel walked away from the window and sat on his couch, holding his phone like it carried real weight. His heartbeat felt louder than the rain now. Memories moved quickly: Emily's laughter, the way she listened fully, the night they stood by the Charles River talking about what scared them most. He remembered how alive he had felt then, before he decided that desire was something to manage instead of trust. A simple reply would not change his life, but ignoring the message would keep it exactly the same. After years of choosing caution, the choice before him felt unfamiliar and unsettling. Finally, with a steady breath, Daniel typed back a short answer agreeing to meet, unsure whether he was opening a door to healing or heartache, but certain of one thing: for the first time in years, he had listened to the part of himself that still wanted more. After that evening, when Emily felt the sudden spark of something she had long ignored, her days became a mixture of hesitation and curiosity. She tried to focus on her work at the small cafe downtown, arranging coffees and pastries for the regulars, but her mind kept drifting back to the thought of Daniel. He had appeared in her life so unexpectedly, with that easy smile and gentle confidence, that she felt both startled and oddly comforted. She wondered if following her desires would lead to happiness or heartbreak, but the longing in her heart refused to be silenced. Every morning, she would wake with a quiet hope, checking her phone almost unconsciously, hoping for a message from him, and every time it arrived, she felt a small surge of warmth that stayed with her all day. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed equally caught between caution and eagerness. There were moments in his texts when his words revealed a depth of feeling he hadn't shared with anyone before, a vulnerability that made Emily's heart tighten. On weekends, they began to spend more time together, walking along the quiet streets of the city, sharing stories of childhood dreams, failed plans, and unexpected moments that had shaped them. Emily found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, feeling that rare connection where someone genuinely listened and understood. Yet, beneath the laughter, there was an unspoken tension, a fragile thread of fear that if she let herself fully follow this desire, it might lead to disappointment. Still, the pull was irresistible, and she noticed herself thinking about him even during mundane moments. The sound of the cafe door chime, the warmth of sunlight on her face, a song playing in the background, all reminders of Daniel and the uncharted emotions he stirred in her. One rainy evening, as they sheltered under the awning of a tiny bookstore, watching the droplets race down the glass, Daniel reached out and brushed a strand of wet hair from Emily's face, and she felt a shiver that was both startling and comforting. That touch, so small and fleeting, made her realize how deeply her desire for him had grown, how much she craved the closeness they had begun to share. Emily struggled with guilt at times, questioning if she was moving too fast or indulging in a fantasy, but the sincerity in Daniel's eyes each time they met reassured her that this was something real, something worth exploring. As the weeks passed, their connection deepened, shared meals, late-night conversations over the phone, walks in the park where silence felt as intimate as words, and small gestures of care that spoke volumes. Emily began to notice the way her heart raced when Daniel laughed at something trivial, the way her fingers lingered in his when they reached for the same cup of coffee, the way her chest tightened with anticipation when she expected to see him. She realized that following her desires wasn't about recklessness but about listening to the quiet truth inside her heart, the truth that this man, with all his flaws and charm, had awakened something she hadn't felt in years, the certainty that life could be tender, exciting, and deeply connected all at once. But as much as she cherished these moments, Emily couldn't ignore the underlying tension of uncertainty. She worried about what would happen if this desire led to something that couldn't last, if the world outside their bubble would intrude and break the fragile beauty they had begun to create. Nights became long with introspection. She would lie awake, thinking about every interaction, analyzing his words, replaying gestures in her mind, and feeling both hope and anxiety. Daniel, too, seemed caught in the same dance of desire and hesitation, occasionally stepping back for a moment, only to return with renewed warmth that made Emily question her doubts. The emotional intensity grew with every encounter, yet it remained tempered by respect and gentleness, a delicate balance that made her feel both safe and exhilarated. One evening, Daniel surprised her with a quiet dinner at his apartment, the soft glow of candles casting shadows that danced across the walls. They talked about everything from dreams to regrets, ambitions to silly childhood memories, and with every story shared, Emily felt layers of her heart opening in ways she hadn't anticipated. When he held her hand across the table, it was as though the world outside ceased to exist, and for a few hours, nothing mattered but the connection between them. She realized that sometimes, following one's desires didn't mean abandoning caution, it meant embracing the truth of what one felt and allowing the heart to guide the way. But just as the night felt perfect, a sudden message on her phone made her pause, a reminder of past responsibilities and obligations that she had momentarily set aside. Anxiety fluttered in her chest as she realized that pursuing desire didn't come without consequences, and yet, the longing in her heart was undeniable. She looked at Daniel, who noticed the flicker of doubt in her eyes, and he squeezed her hand reassuringly, silently acknowledging the unspoken fears that both thrilled and terrified them. Emily knew that this journey of following her heart would not be simple, it would be filled with moments of uncertainty, courage, hesitation, and revelation. But she also knew that to ignore her desires would be to deny a vital part of herself, and the thought of turning away from something that felt so alive was unbearable. In that delicate balance of longing and fear, she realized that the beauty of life lay not in avoiding risk but in embracing it with awareness, with care, and with honesty. As the evening drew to a close and Daniel walked her to her door, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and fragrant. She felt the warmth of the night mingling with the warmth of her desire, and in that quiet moment, she understood that following her heart's yearning was not just a choice, it was a necessity. They parted with a lingering glance, a promise of tomorrow, and a sense that the story between them was only beginning, filled with twists of emotion, tender moments, and the irresistible pull of hearts seeking fulfillment. Emily stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and allowed herself to savor the mixture of anticipation, longing, and hope, knowing that sometimes, the heart's desires were the truest guide to life's unexpected and beautiful paths. And as she sat by her window that night, staring at the city lights that blurred like gentle stars in the distance, she whispered to herself that the journey she had embarked on, with all its tenderness, uncertainty, and romance, was exactly the one her soul had been waiting for, even if she didn't yet know where it would lead. As the weeks unfolded, Emily and Daniel's connection deepened in ways that neither of them had anticipated, blending excitement with a quiet tension that made every encounter feel both exhilarating and fragile. They found themselves caught in a rhythm of longing and discovery, learning the subtleties of each other's moods, habits, and unspoken thoughts. Daniel would often arrive at Emily's cafe unannounced, carrying a small gift, a book he remembered she wanted, a pastry from the bakery down the street, a handwritten note with a fleeting poem, and each time, Emily felt a thrill that made her heart race and her worries momentarily vanish. The intimacy between them was not physical but emotional, a connection that went beyond superficial attraction, where a glance or a smile conveyed more than words ever could. They spent long afternoons walking through the city's parks, talking about dreams they had never shared with anyone, discussing hopes, fears, and past mistakes that shaped them, and in those moments, Emily felt an unusual freedom, the freedom to be vulnerable, to be herself without pretense. Yet, amid this blossoming closeness, uncertainty lingered like a shadow at the edges of their happiness. Emily would occasionally wonder if she was moving too fast, if her heart was placing too much hope in a bond that could be fragile. She wrestled with these thoughts quietly, feeling a mix of guilt and desire, understanding that following her emotions was a delicate dance that required courage, honesty, and patience. Daniel, aware of her occasional hesitation, would reassure her not with grand gestures but with quiet consistency, sending thoughtful messages in the morning, remembering the smallest details of their conversations, and showing up with presence that spoke louder than words. One evening, they attended a local art exhibition, surrounded by paintings that evoked dreams, memories, and imagination, and as they wandered from one canvas to another, Emily felt her hand brush against Daniel's. That simple touch, so unassuming yet intimate, sent a ripple of warmth through her body, a silent acknowledgement of the growing bond that neither wanted to deny. Later, sitting at a nearby cafe, they spoke about the future with a tentative hopefulness, sharing visions of what life could be like if they dared to follow their desires fully. Emily realized that desire was not a fleeting impulse but a compass pointing toward what she truly needed: connection, understanding, and the courage to embrace feelings without fear. But the heart is never without its conflicts, and soon a complication arose that neither of them had anticipated. Emily received news that her job might require her to relocate temporarily to another city, an opportunity that could advance her career but would put distance between her and Daniel. The thought of leaving stirred anxiety and sorrow. The desire she had so carefully nurtured felt suddenly fragile, vulnerable to the circumstances of life. She struggled with the idea of pursuing ambition at the cost of emotional connection, torn between practicality and longing, while Daniel faced his own turmoil, wanting to support her dreams yet fearing the emptiness that distance might bring to the closeness they shared. They spent hours talking through the possibilities, sitting on a bench as twilight painted the sky in soft hues of purple and gold, holding hands and promising to remain honest about their feelings no matter what the future held. Emily realized that love, desire, and connection were not always about easy choices. They were about resilience, courage, and trust. She began to see that following her desires meant not just pursuing passion in the moment, but nurturing it carefully through communication, patience, and respect for both hearts involved. Over the next few days, she and Daniel experimented with small ways to bridge the looming distance: long phone calls late into the night, shared playlists of songs that reminded them of each other, and video calls that captured the warmth of smiles and laughter despite the miles. The tension of impending separation brought a new dimension to their relationship, heightening every shared moment, every gesture, every whispered conversation. Emily found herself appreciating the subtleties more than ever: the way Daniel's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the quiet reassurance in his voice when she expressed doubt, the gentle way he encouraged her to follow her own dreams even if it meant temporary absence. It became clear to her that desire, when guided by understanding and mutual respect, could survive challenges and grow even stronger under pressure. Yet, the heart rarely remains untouched by fear for long. One afternoon, while preparing to leave for a brief trip to the neighboring city for work, Emily felt a wave of panic she could hardly name, an ache in her chest, a reluctance to step away from the life she was beginning to treasure. Daniel sensed her hesitation and suggested they take one last walk together before her departure, along the quiet riverside where the sunset reflected in golden streaks across the water. They spoke little at first, letting the serene atmosphere settle around them, until Emily finally confessed her fear of losing the closeness they had worked so hard to nurture. Daniel listened patiently, holding her hands in his, and said softly, "Desire isn't just about being together in the same place. It's about the willingness to trust that what matters will find its way back to you." His words, simple yet profound, struck a chord deep within her. She realized that following her desires wasn't just about immediate gratification, it was about allowing love and connection to breathe, to exist even in uncertainty, and to remain faithful to the truth of her heart. That night, as Emily packed for her journey, she felt a bittersweet mixture of excitement and longing, knowing that the distance ahead would test both of them but also strengthen the bond they had cultivated. Their farewell at the train station was quiet, filled with lingering glances, a soft embrace, and promises whispered against the hum of the arriving train. Each step she took onto the platform was accompanied by the echo of desire and hope intertwined, a reminder that the heart's journey is rarely linear but always worth the courage it demands. On the train, as the city receded into twilight and the landscape blurred past the window, Emily allowed herself to reflect on the lessons of the past weeks: that desire must be acknowledged, nurtured, and respected, that connection requires patience and honesty, and that love, in its most tender form, thrives not in certainty but in trust and vulnerability. She thought of Daniel, imagining him returning home, perhaps replaying their shared moments in his own mind, and felt a warmth that transcended the physical distance between them. The days ahead would be challenging, yet they were now bound by something deeper than infatuation, a recognition of mutual respect, understanding, and the courage to embrace desire without fear. Emily knew that following her heart had led her to a path of emotional growth, where longing and fulfillment intertwined, and where the risk of heartbreak was outweighed by the possibility of genuine connection. The train rattled on, carrying her away but also reminding her that desire, when respected and acted upon with sincerity, could survive distance, obstacles, and time. And as the night deepened, she closed her eyes by the window, letting the gentle sway of the train lull her into reflection, knowing that the journey she had chosen, to honor her desires while embracing the unknown, was shaping her life in ways more profound than she had ever imagined, preparing her for the moments of joy, heartbreak, discovery, and intimacy that were still to come with Daniel, and with the choices they would continue to make together. Emily's days away from Daniel stretched longer than she had expected, each morning beginning with a quiet ache that no coffee or routine could dispel. The city she had temporarily moved to for work felt foreign, despite its familiarity, and every street corner, every cafe, every passing face reminded her of how much she longed for the comfort of Daniel's presence. Yet, within that ache, there was also a persistent warmth, a reassurance that their connection had not faded but had grown stronger through the small ways they continued to nurture it from a distance. Each night, she and Daniel would talk for hours, sometimes laughing over silly memories, sometimes sharing their worries and fears about the future, and sometimes falling into silence, letting the comfort of shared presence speak louder than words. Emily realized that desire, when guided by trust and care, could withstand physical separation, that longing itself could become a form of intimacy, keeping hearts entwined even when miles apart. One evening, Danielle surprised her with a package at her temporary apartment, a small box wrapped carefully, containing a journal filled with little notes he had written over the past weeks, reminders of moments they had shared, quotes from songs they both loved, and sketches of places they had wandered together. As she flipped through each page, her eyes filling with tears, she understood in a new way how deeply he had invested in this connection, how desire could be transformed into an ongoing dialogue of care and attention. Emily responded in kind, sending him messages during the day about things she noticed, small observations, jokes, and heartfelt reflections, and soon their exchange became a ritual, a rhythm that carried them through the days apart. But as the end of her temporary assignment drew near, the excitement of returning home was tempered by nervous anticipation. Emily wondered if the bond they had maintained over distance could translate seamlessly back into the intimacy of everyday life, if the vulnerability and longing they had cultivated would survive the reality of routine. When she finally returned, stepping off the train and feeling the crisp air of her familiar city, her heart raced with a mix of relief and anxious hope. Daniel was waiting at the station, and the sight of him, tall, smiling, the same warmth in his eyes she had remembered, made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't anticipated. They embraced, a quiet but powerful moment that conveyed months of longing, trust, and care, and in that instant, Emily felt the culmination of her choice to follow her desires, a choice that had demanded patience, courage, and honesty. Over the following days, they resumed their walks, meals, and shared moments with a renewed intensity, each encounter colored by the knowledge that they had weathered separation and had chosen each other despite uncertainty. Emily noticed the subtle shifts in their dynamic, deeper conversations, more effortless laughter, a sense of security tempered with excitement, and an unspoken acknowledgement that desire was not a fleeting spark but a lasting flame when nurtured with attention and respect. One rainy afternoon, as they walked through the city park, Daniel stopped under the shelter of a large oak tree and turned to her, his eyes searching hers with a seriousness that made her heart skip. "I've realized something," he said softly, "that following what my heart wanted brought me to you, and I can't imagine not choosing this, not choosing us." Emily felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and a deep sense of recognition that desire, when honored with integrity, led not to recklessness but to profound connection. They shared a quiet moment in the rain, letting the droplets mingle with the warmth of their laughter and whispered confessions, understanding that life's uncertainties would continue, but the choice to follow their hearts had created something resilient and beautiful. Days turned into weeks, and their relationship settled into a rhythm of shared experiences and mutual support, each moment a reminder of the journey they had undertaken, the initial spark, the tentative steps, the challenges of distance, and the ultimate affirmation that desire, when approached thoughtfully and with courage, could lead to lasting fulfillment. Emily reflected on her own growth, how following her desires had demanded bravery, honesty, and patience, and how it had led her to deeper self-understanding and emotional richness. Daniel, too, expressed a sense of wonder at how their bond had evolved, how desire had transformed from fleeting attraction to meaningful connection, and how the choice to embrace it fully had enriched both their lives. One evening, they attended a small outdoor concert, sitting close together under the soft glow of string lights, sharing a blanket and laughing as the music swirled around them. In that moment, Emily realized that the joy of following desire was not just in the fulfillment of longing but in the journey itself, the shared growth, the understanding, the emotional intimacy, and the gentle, persistent thrill of hearts recognizing one another. As the night drew to a close, they walked home hand in hand, the city quiet except for the distant hum of life, and Emily felt a profound sense of peace, that desire, when acted upon with care and honesty, could lead to happiness that was steady yet alive, tender yet thrilling. In the following months, they continued to navigate life together, celebrating successes, supporting one another through challenges, and deepening the emotional layers of their relationship. Emily recognized that following one's desires was not a guarantee of perfection, but it was a commitment to authenticity, vulnerability, and courage, qualities that transformed ordinary life into something extraordinary. In quiet moments, she would glance at Daniel, thinking about the journey they had shared, the moments of longing and anticipation, the challenges they had faced, and the unwavering choice to honor the heart's truth. And in those moments, she understood the simple, powerful truth: sometimes, the most important thing a person can do is to listen to their desires, to follow the quiet urgings of the heart, and to embrace the path it reveals with trust, patience, and courage. Their story, filled with longing, tenderness, growth, and romantic connection, had reached a point of equilibrium, not the end of excitement, but the beginning of a life lived with emotional honesty, mutual respect, and the fulfillment that comes from choosing love and connection over fear. Emily and Daniel, side by side, knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, the foundation they had built by following their heart's desires would sustain them, guiding them through uncertainty with a deep, enduring, and gentle passion, proving that sometimes, the courage to honor what the heart truly wants leads not only to romantic fulfillment but also to profound personal growth, emotional richness, and the quiet joy of a love that feels both thrilling and safe, tender and real, a love born from desire, nurtured with care, and lived with authenticity.